Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the TigerBeetle update into Mojaloop integration. Myself and Sidi will be showing you guys all of the work that's been done.
Mike.
Yes. Is this clearer? Is this better? Hello? Okay. I hope everyone has had a chance to explore Zanzibar a bit. It's really lovely. So, yeah, the agenda for today, we're going to be talking about why we are integrating TigerBeetle into Mojaloop and more specifically Central Settlement. And then also what the impact is of doing that. And then obviously the progress that we've been making up until this point, the constraints that we faced and how we are overcoming those. And we then will play a demo of doing the full integration test of Central Settlement using TigerBeetle. And then the next steps going forward. Over to you, Sidi.
Cool. Thank you, Jason. All right. So I thought it'd be useful just to talk a little bit about like why we're doing this work. Why is it relevant? Why do we think it matters? What impact are we hoping to have with incorporating this piece of work into an existing system that already works, right? Already being implemented. Keeping it right there, Jason. So is this audible? Yeah, okay. So we drew inspiration from two things really. That's sort of what drove us or gave us impetus to do the work. The first was, there was a group here in the community in 2020 that decided to look at the performance of a Mojaloop system under a little bit of strain or increasing amounts of transaction volume throughput. And some of the findings there, or some of the things that we learned, some of our predecessors were here, was that some of the most resource intensive or the busiest parts of the system handle transfers and settlement. So we then took a bit of a close look and found that, or learned a little bit more as well in a transfers context, that to get one transfer through the system, the application was interacting with the database between 15 and 20 times. So it just got us thinking a little bit about, is there something that could maybe be done over there to alleviate some of that, let's say, resource hungriness, right? So that was a bit of inspiration. The other on the point of cost was thinking about looking at what it was taking for our dev team to get a sandbox environment or a test environment up and running, a Mojaloop one, right? So you would have a Kubernetes cluster, and the only way we could really get it up and running and stable, sort of happily sending through some test transactions, was on an AWS instance at the time. And that would cost us maybe between $10 and $15, depending on whether it was an in-demand sort of service that we went for or like an annual plan. So it felt like an opportunity. Well, it felt like there could be some costs that start to accumulate in that sense, right? Depending on the number of environments that you have, or whatever the needs are. And certainly this was a dev context. So we could sort of start to see that in a production level or at production grade with several environments, the costs might start to add up. So it just gave us a little bit of inspiration to look at whether there'd be an opportunity to do a bit of work on something or building block in the system that could alleviate some of that potential accumulation of costs, as well as potential performance bottleneck, if you will. Cool. Next one, please, Jason. So we're hoping that the impact of the work then will be, from a business point of view, just enabling the system to scale or to grow significantly, really, from the averages of systems currently. I guess that they vary quite a bit. Up until I joined this community, I think I'd only really seen systems at peaks of about 100 transactions per second. In these worlds, we're talking about like hundreds and then thousands and getting up to the millions, really, right? And starting to think about different contexts of like, it's the iStore on, the iStore on Black Friday. We're talking millions of transactions that are going through a system. So just thinking about the business impact of being able to have volumes increase significantly without having to dedicate copious amounts of resources to that. Yeah, and then of course the cost impact of what those additional resources might be, right? So scaling from a business point of view and the total cost of ownership. And then on the second point of development, we're part of an open source community, so we're certainly learning that like the easier it is and the quicker it is for somebody to be able to get an environment up and running, to be able to have the onboarding be, or the learning curve be a lot less steep, can be really helpful. So we would just like to see whether we can contribute a building block that's reasonably easy, or that just gets easier and easier to be able to get up and running. So thinking about dev experience, thinking about cost, thinking about scaling up. Cool, next one, please, Jason. So I want to just talk a little bit about the key objectives, and then we'll talk about what success looks like. The rest is a little bit of a reading job. What we've been able to get through in this past, or this cycle that we are drawing to a close, is updating our design document with integrating the settlement piece of work, TigerBeetle into the settlement central service, doing regression testing for that as well. Development and testing work for that as well. So that's complete. We are now looking at expanding our set of test cases there, particularly to include broader test cases. The testing we've done so far has been just on point-to-point P2P transactions. And then, of course, expanding that test suite to include negative testing. Cool, so that was point number 3, integration test expansion in progress. That's why we see the blue exclamation. Point 4 has been really great collaboration that we've been doing with the VNext build team led by Pedro over there. So we envisage, or we're hoping to be able to integrate TigerBeetle together with the VNext build team into 4, I think, of the business content, so 4 of the functional areas. 2 of those have been done for the alpha release. That's integrating TigerBeetle into participants' business context, as well as accounts and balances, which is just a really cool opportunity for us to see it be reasonably quick, reasonably seamless in this new architecture, and having the Beetle run, start to run things in a way that hopefully to test out that impact that we're thinking or hoping to have. And then number 5, we'll be doing a demo then today. We do have a workaround, and I'll talk about what the constraint was that led us to the workaround, but demonstrating TigerBeetle running, or central service settlement running TigerBeetle. Alrighty, so we define success as a full or complete set of test cases, negative tests as well. We want to see an implementation guide, so something that a developer or an implementer can use, whether they're running the current version of Mojaloop or VNext when it's eventually complete, or 2.0, if you will. Guide documents there. We really understand that, like, all of this being an experiment, or being, if you will, ambitious, means that we need to be able to quantify or demonstrate what we mean when we say performance, right? Or when we say total impact on the cost of ownership. So we're definitely looking to be able to report on, coming and going, looking to be able to report on and quantify impact on settlement performance, as well as clearing performance. And then, of course, the impact on the cost of ownership. And then finally, the last point, there's a very specific and very necessary process that we'll have to go through in the community to be able to have this be accepted potentially as part of the core repository. So whether it is ensuring that we cover all of our bases with the design authority, product council, if that's also required, as well as wider community review and approval. Those 5 points together will help us at least be able to define some level of success. Cool, next one, please, Jason. All right, so I mentioned workarounds with the settlement demo that we're going to do today. And these are due to 2 constraints. We have the TigerBeetle team, formerly part of Quell. They're now broken off into their own amazing team, or amazing company led by Iran. And the first bit of work that the team is still busy with, what we have is a beta release of TigerBeetle currently. So it's not yet production ready. But the first bit of development work that we need to see completed is having the API calls available for transfer timeouts being run by TigerBeetle, or being handled fully by TigerBeetle. So today we're still, as it stands with the demo, we still are depending on SQL to manage or to handle our transfer timeouts. So that's one crucial dependency, which we've worked around for the purpose of this demo. The second one, please, Jason. So fully fledged query functionality in TigerBeetle is also in progress. So today you can query by an identifier or an ID of a transaction. Within the next, we believe, probably an average of 3 months, we will have fuller query capability, including range queries. So that will allow us to stop depending on the traditional SQL database for, I think, 9 of the most resource intensive or busiest tables, which is where I think we'll start to be able to show some actual quants when we say performance impact. So until that duplication of data has been taken care of, we're still kind of telling you that we're hoping to do something. So definitely appreciate that. All right, and I think that's it. I'm going to hand over to you, Jason. Please take it away.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Tiri. Let's see. Okay, so I want to give an overview of what the demo is going to cover and how it runs. So those of you who are familiar with the settlement integration test will know everything that's going on here. So basically the first step is to initialize the environment that we're going to be testing on. The setup step over there is pulling the necessary Docker images, as well as building the central settlement Docker image from the actual central ledger repository. We then have the migration scripts that will start the configs for us. And then finally, the central settlement specific test data that will be initialized. And then before we can get to settlement, we first need to get to clearing. So the first step in the clearing is making sure that only clear transactions are to be settled, and all of those will be allocated to the settlement window. So once, in today's example, we'll be doing 3 transfers, 1 being Euro and 2 being USD. When we run the actual demo, we'll go into a bit more detail there. And then when we get to actual settlement, the very first event is going to be the trigger, the trigger event, which will basically create all of the necessary accounts for settlement, and that will be accounts for each of the DFSPs, but not necessarily for your hub accounts. Your hub accounts will only be created if the account doesn't exist, the hub accounts doesn't exist already, and that will be per currency. So only if there's a new currency being onboarded, you'll go and create the new hub accounts for that currency, and those will typically have a running balance. But once settlement completes, those balances will be reset back to 0. We'll go into a bit more detail there when we run the demo. And at that point, you'll be in a pending settlement state. So you've basically just prepared all the settlement accounts, no actual obligations have been created. Whereas in the prepare step, you create the settlement obligations for the payer and the payee. And once that's been done successfully, you'll have transfers recorded. And both of these events are managed internally depending on your settlement models and how the hub chooses to settle. And it could be daily, hourly, all of that will be controlled by the actual hub. And then finally, we're getting to where the pay needs to, the previous step, number 2 there, is where the obligations have been created now. And we want both the payee and the payer to go and fulfill these obligations. So the payee will first need to fulfill his or her obligation. And at the same time, if the settlement model has been configured for it, the net debit cap limit check is also performed at this stage to make sure that it's not exceeded. And as soon as the payee's limit obligations have been fulfilled, the payer would need to fulfill the obligations. Now, this is an interesting one because we're actually performing a 2-phase transfer in TigerBeetle to achieve that. So, yeah, the 2-phase transfer is actually used there in order to also cater for the abort call, which we're not covering in the video today, but that still makes it very easy to roll back the actual reservation, or yeah, to support the actual abort call. And then once all of the transfers has been committed, your actual settlement will move into a settled state. Yes. Okay. Okay, so there's an overview of what we're going to be looking at. I'm going to, yeah, let me just look for the video quickly and fire that up for you. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for the TigerBeetle settlement integration demo. Okay, how do I get it to, give me a sec. Other way, there we go. Can everyone, let me, I will be showcasing running Can we turn up the volume for the video? Do I do it from here? Okay. No, I think it's being done.
Volume. Press play.
The integration test into.
Do you have to turn this up just in time?
Where's my mouse now? Oh, sorry.
All right. Sorry.
End with specialized output. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for the TigerBeetle settlement integration demo. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for the TigerBeetle settlement integration demo. I will be showcasing running the integration test end to end with specialized output in the integration tests. Before we can actually start with running the integration test, we need the environment ready in which the integration test will be executed in. We will see over here all of the Docker images being built or being pulled from the various repositories. You can see the TigerBeetle image being prepared here and being pulled. There's the simulator, the central ledger, the Mojaloop API adapter, and some additional properties. The actual central settlement Docker image will be built from the actual repository, as we can see over here, until the build is actually completed. The next part is starting the actual containers that we will be testing against, starting with Kafka, the database, as well as running the actual migration scripts against the database. Once all of those are completed, we will be running the actual simulator, followed by central ledger and the Mojaloop API adapter. At this point, we've got all of the necessary running containers for us to run our test against. Here is the command that actually starts our integration tests, and we can see here the health checks will make sure that all of the services are up and running before any actual tests are performed. The very first thing to be done is the setting up of the settlement models, the participants, participant endpoints, the net debit caps, and the payer funds in data, followed by 3 transfers. The first transfer will be done in Euro, followed by 2 USD transfers. We can see that over here for Euro, USD, and USD. At this point, we are actually ready to start our integration test, but before we do, we will first run a bunch of TigerBeetle verification integration tests to ensure that the TigerBeetle configuration is active and all of the configs are the way they should be, followed by existing test cases to ensure that the settlement windows, the settlement window contents, aggregation, etc. is all set up as required, along with the actual settlement model. Now that all of the data is prepared, we can start with our first settlement event, which is trigger settlement event. The trigger settlement event is responsible for creating all of the necessary accounts required during settlement. The first 2 accounts is hub-owned accounts, the hub multilateral, and the hub reconciliation accounts. You'll notice that all of the hub accounts have an ID of 1, and there will be a hub account created per currency, and hub account type. These accounts will not be recreated during each settlement, but will always have a balance of 0 if all settlements are complete. Over here we've got 2 DFSP settlement accounts that will be created for each settlement cycle. This representing the payer and this one representing the payee. Now that we have all of our accounts created, the actual settlement data will be created along with its initial state, which is pending settlement. Now that we have the necessary accounts, we can actually prepare the settlement or initiate the settlement obligation. First, we will create the settlement obligation for the payer and then for the payee via this settlement transfers prepare event, the second event. You'll notice that the movement of funds will be from the hub account, which is debited. The reconciliation account would be credited. The hub reconciliation account then again debited. And finally, the settlement account for the payer will be debited or credited. And we can see over here that the balance for the payer settlement account will have a positive balance. In this case, 1,324. Now that we've created the settlement obligation for the payee, we'll follow that by creating the obligation for the payee. You'll notice that the state for these transfers are PS transfers recorded. Moving over to the payee, the same thing will happen, but in this case it will be reversed. Instead of doing a debit, a credit will be performed from the hub recon accounts, and then finally a debit into the payee settlement account. In this case, again, 1,324, so your actual balance will be a negative. And if I just scroll up back to the payer, you'll notice that it has a positive value, followed by the payee with a negative value. This means that the settlement obligation has now been successfully created for this transfer, and the state of the actual settlement is now PS transfers recorded. So at this point we've got the settlement obligation along with all of the correct accounts, and we are now ready to receive the fulfillment of these obligations both by the payee and then by the payer. This settlement transfers reserve event would be responsible for fulfilling the actual settlement for the payee, and we are achieving that via a two-phase commit. And you'll notice that all of the reserve balances for the hub accounts, as well as then for the DFSP settlement account, will be performed. So no actual, unlike the previous reservations, which were one-phase transfers, the reason for the two-phase transfer during reservation is to ensure from this point onward we can still abort the actual settlement, and all of the funds that were moved would have been avoided. And it's also very easy to see at which state the settlement is by simply looking at the balances. Okay, now that we have the payee fulfill this actual obligation, as well as the limit check, net debit cap limit, will also be checked at this point to ensure that the limits aren't exceeded for the DFSPs. Okay, now that we've got the payee fulfilled the obligation, we will, as well as you'll notice here that the settlement state has now moved from recorded to PS transfers reserved. And further down, at this point where we have the settlement transfer commit, is when the payer is fulfilling the settlement obligation. Instead of funds being moved at this point, you will have the pending or reserved transfers being committed, which will affect all of the balances as we can see here. So all of our reservations has simply been committed, as well as closing the loop for the funds out of the payer, meaning all of our balances are now reset back to a zero. The hub, multilateral, the hub reconciliation, and then the payer and the payee. This then means all of the transfers that was part of the settlement cycle has been committed, and the actual settlement state has been moved from pending settlement to settled. Okay, so that concludes the full cycle of settling the euro transfer. I will scroll down to the USD transfers to illustrate how you have a running balance on your hub multilateral and hub reconciliation account. So we can see the accounts being created for our USD settlement, the transfers prepare, the transfers prepare again for the payee, reservation, commit, and over here, because this is the deferred transfer, which is the second USD transfer, we can see that the hub account is starting with a balance of zero still, even though there is a debit and credit balance on both of these accounts, and your DFSP accounts starting with a zero balance. Furthermore, I'm going to go all the way to the end. We can see here again all of the balances are back to zero, and now that all of the tests have been successfully completed, we can see here all of the 143 integration tests has passed. The teardown of the actual environment will begin, and that is settlement using TigerBeetle. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Bye. Just want to bounce back to the presentation real quick.
So I'll talk so long because it's not essential. Last time, cool. So it's all the way to the next steps. So the first next step will be for us to incorporate resolving those guys, actually those constraints. That'll be working with the next release of the TigerBeetle team's resolution of those 2 points that we mentioned, with the API calls and with the timeouts, transfer timeouts. Cool, next one, please. Expanding on that integration test suite, adding negative test cases. Yep, next one, Jason. Quantifying those performance metrics that we spoke about, as well as the impact on cost, and then finally getting started with the process, number 4, please, with the process for community review process. Hopefully this will be a reasonable way for us to show that there's some way to have a positive impact on those points that we mentioned right up front, and that is it from us. So if you have any questions, we're happy to take them now.
I think we've got about 3 questions. Any questions? Tom. We're going to grab you in a break, but you know. So thanks. That actually was pretty clear. But on the 2-phase commit, there's one resource manager going over X many nodes. I mean, you're doing scale out here, right?
Yes, all of that is using the existing TigerBeetle underlying state machine replicating to different nodes. Yes, so
that protocol, like, that'll just go horizontally. And you'd already, I think, back in Arusha, didn't you provide some details of the scale out, or of how far you could actually go? Can you just remind me how far you've tested on the horizontal?
Well,
it's more than 2, right?
Yes, I think at that stage the nodes was 7. It is configurable, but depending on your actual implementation, you would use more or less than 7. But that's okay. It all obviously depends on the host and where you're running and what resource limitations you have. But that's the ideal number of nodes.
Okay, thanks.
also depending heavily how the network is configured between them.
Any other final question? Right. Thank you, Jason and Tilly.
Thank you very much. If there's any questions, yes, please come and say hi.